We're here with Taylor Levy, and you've been on the show before. Where are you at these days?
I am physically located in the San Francisco Bay Area these days. I moved away from the border.
Well, you have no idea what's going on down there.
Yeah, why are we even talking
there? You don't know.
I was 11 years on the ground on both sides of the border in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, and it just got too much. It got too dangerous. It got too scary. It got too sad. So I decided to move up to Northern California and away from Texas, and it's lovely, but I still do all border stuff virtually. WhatsApp and Zoom all day, every day.
I wanted to talk to you because a couple weeks ago, I was down at my parents' house, and my dad, I look at him as being an earnest news consumer. He watches things that he thinks are the news. He's not like a, foaming at the mouth MAGA person, but he just wants to be informed. And he said to me very seriously, now that they're not enforcing the border anymore, I'm curious, like the people that are coming over, do they come to you to seek help? And I had to explain that there's plenty of border enforcement, and he was very confused. And then he asked about the buses of people being taken to DC and that sort of a thing. And then that sort of dovetailed into a conversation about CRT, which we won't get into today, but it made me realize like there's so much confusion about just the reality of what's going on at the border that I wanted to have a conversation with you about sort of where we're at today. What is going on at the border?
Yeah, I think that it's incredibly clear that there is a lot of confusion, and that the confusion isn't just among the general public or people who want to be informed, that the confusion is also very clearly among immigration attorneys. So that's why a lot of what the time that I spend is mentoring other immigration attorneys in the northern parts of the United States and along the border about what is going on. Why does it feel like in some ways that, the border's open, look, we've seen all this B-roll footage of people being able to cross. And then why is it other people, I have this horrific case, the family was murdered, there's machete wounds, there's stacks and stacks of evidence, and they weren't even allowed to ask for asylum before they were put on a plane and dropped off in El Salvador, despite Orantes, despite all of our laws on the books about asylum. So it is just incredibly complicated right now and a total and complete mess, even though we have Democrats in the administration.
What about the idea that the border has somehow been opened? Joe Biden sat down and he signed the open border declaration.
That was huge.
That was a huge win for us. But what would you say to somebody who has that concern that it is really just ranchers are being forced at gunpoint to open their fences or whatever to immigrants and those sorts of things?
Absolutely not. The border is incredibly closed. The border is as heavily policed and monitored as it ever has been. There are massive amounts of surveillance. And what we're seeing is people exercising their lawful right under our laws, under international treaties, to seek protection in this country, to seek asylum and protection in this country. Unfortunately, we're now in a situation where the number one determination, the number one deciding factor of whether or not you can actually exercise your legal right to seek asylum is not the strength of your case. It's not how much you've suffered. It's not how much evidence you have. And it's not even if you have an attorney at this point. It's simply your nationality. Because Title 42, which is the COVID era, Stephen Miller, Trump policy of closing down the border to asylum seekers, to basically everyone in this justification of public health, has created a system where some nationalities are able to seek asylum because we do not have diplomatic relationships with those countries, and we cannot rapidly expel people under Title 42. While other nationalities will be repeatedly dumped on the streets of Mexico under Title 42, no matter how strong their cases are. And so Mexico right now will only accept Title 42 expulsions, which an expulsion for the lawyers listening is not a deportation. It's not a removal. It's not a voluntary departure. It's basically just like a back to the 90s pushback type of a system. They get fingerprints, photos, and then just thrown on the street. Mexico will only accept Mexicans, Hondurans, Salvadorans, and Guatemalans. And so why we're seeing large numbers of people crossing larger numbers is because the smuggling routes have shifted. Organized crime cartels, the smugglers, have really actively recruited other people who are from other nationalities who are fleeing extreme danger and violence, primarily Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, and Cubans. And we do not have expulsion flights to those countries. Mexico, for the vast majority of the time, will not agree to accept those countries back as expulsions. And so when people who are Venezuelan, Nicaraguan, Cuban, and some other countries, Peru, Ecuador, Indians, Georgians, Russians, etc., cross and ask for asylum, they actually have access to the system. They're able to pursue their legal rights. So they might be detained and be able to seek asylum that way, or they might be paroled under the discretion of DHS to pursue their immigration claims, their asylum cases here in the United States.
One of the narratives, this reporter who's with Fox, Bill Ass, and I don't know his name, he was making a hypothesis that these immigrants are actually very savvy and that they've been watching American politics. And he actually referenced back to one of the Democratic presidential debates where they asked all the candidates, hey, would you like decriminalize, was it 1335 or 1325 illegal entry? And he said all the candidates raised their hand, which wasn't true, but whatever. But he kind of pointed that as like these immigrants have really been paying attention, and they knew that once a Democrat won that they could come over. So with all your conversations with immigrants coming on the border, what was their favorite part of the Democratic primary? Were they enthused by Cory Booker? Did they think maybe he was a little bit fake? Were they kind of disappointed that Castro didn't really get his messaging across? So what was it about that primary season that really kind of engaged them?
Yes, clearly I've never spoken to a migrant who was watching the Democratic primaries or paying any attention to that. Do the migrants pay attention to the news, pay attention particularly to Title 42, the way people talk about Title 42? Absolutely. Social media is huge. There was just a report that came out yesterday it was covered by BuzzFeed, but it was from a transparency project of looking at all of the just extreme amounts of misinformation on Facebook, WhatsApp, TikTok that is fed to migrants or potential migrants about what the border is going to look like. What's really interesting is Title 42, like I said, implemented by Trump March 20th, 2020. And Title 42 had actually been brought up repeatedly prior to COVID as what if we try and keep migrants out by saying mumps, by saying chickenpox, by saying measles? What if we use all of these things as public health emergencies, to keep
just
people
like
out?
General immigrant cootie stuff, just like kind of gross, which
really tracks with like our long-term history of Chinese Exclusion Act and
right.
Gassing people when they had to cross, like just spraying DDT on them because they allegedly carrying diseases, etc. And so what was interesting about that is it was under Trump that Title 42 did not apply to Cubans and Venezuelans and Nicaraguans. And so it was the same situation where people, those nationalities, could come in and seek asylum. And so it was Biden who refused to get rid of Title 42 when the administration came into office repeatedly. There's been mass amounts of litigation. They finally tried to get rid of it. It was supposed to end on May 23rd, and several states sued, forcing it to stay in effect. But what that's actually meant instead is that there's been more and more of these other nationalities realizing that they have access to the system and targeted outreach to these nationalities as well. Like that is just accurate and true. It doesn't mean that the individuals themselves don't have very real reasons for fleeing the Venezuelan communist regime. Trump says that he's a terrorist, right? Put a bounty out on his head. We don't have diplomatic relationships with Venezuela practically at all. And all of the Republicans, Abbott, DeSantis, they're people who actively speak out against the Venezuelan government at all turns, but now are trying to call these same Venezuelan asylum seekers who are seeking protection and freedom under our laws lawfully illegal aliens who are sneaking into our country. People are crossing in broad daylight and requesting permission to seek safety. The word that they use in Spanish when they do this is entregar. I turned myself in. But since all of the ports of entry are closed, you can't go to a bridge and turn yourselves in that way. You got to wade across the river and turn yourselves in to border officials that way. But they're being apprehended. It's not like a bunch of people sneaking through.
Right. Now, you could, and we have had systems where you go to the port of entry and there's a sort of standardized procedure for processing people. And you're saying that that's not being done right now. Is that part of Title 42?
Yeah, so that's part of Title 42.
Okay.
As of March 2020, they shut down all the ports of entry. You can't seek asylum at the ports of entry. Prior to that, there were other issues, right, with metering and the lawsuits against the metering, where, a judge has ruled in the Al Otro Lado case that metering is completely illegal. But that case, it was all argued prior to Title 42 being in existence. So the judge has somewhat not agreed to address the Title 42 issue sufficiently. There are some exceptions to that, so that it's possible to seek out Title 42 exemptions. That involves a lawyer, that involves requesting exemptions from CBP at the ports of entry. It's very ad hoc. It's based on vulnerabilities. It's very low numbers. And this week, we saw a shutdown of the Title 42 exemption process at 3 of the major ports of entry. So at Nuevo Laredo, they were shut down this week. At Reynosa, Hidalgo, they were shut down. And in El Paso, Juarez, they were shut down. Meaning people who are trying to do the right thing, quote unquote, trying to seek safety, extremely vulnerable cases from Central American countries, from Haiti, from these other countries where they could get expelled. And even folks who are Venezuelan, folks who just don't want to go to the Coyotes. They want to do things, quote unquote, the right way, all having all of their dates canceled. And it's a complete and total mess. There is not a way for people to go to the ports of entry, without intervention and seek asylum. They're just told, go away. And when you tell them to go away, they turn to organized crime instead. They turn to smugglers.
Right.
So I know when Title 42 began, I think the vast consensus was it was complete bull, and it's not legal, and obviously it's going to be, litigated and overturned. And that never happened. Why did that never happen? Were we just wrong about the legality of it?
I don't think we were wrong about the legality of it at all. There was a significant win to some extent in the Wisha case, which is primarily ACLU and other litigators. It's called Wisha. It's Huisha. That's one of the plaintiffs' name, Wisha. In that case, the win was that now CBP is at least supposed to screen everyone for withholding and CAT as opposed to asylum prior to expulsions. In actuality, we're not seeing that complied upon. They were kind of ad hoc suits where first they just fought Title 42 for strategic reasons just for unaccompanied minors. That case was called PJES, and there were lots of wins in that case. That case did become mooted out because Biden stopped applying Title 42 to unaccompanied minors. The Wisha case only applies to families with minor children as opposed to single adults as well. But the Wisha case has gotten really tied up in all of the anti-Biden litigation that's happened of Texas v. Biden, Louisiana v. Biden, and lots of other states joining those suits to try and force Title 42 to stay in place. Because the administration did finally announce that they were ready to get rid of it May 23rd. The CDC is saying this is endemic now. We can go to concerts. We can go to Coachella. Burning Man can happen. All of these things can happen. Everyone can fly without masks, everything. But supposedly, scary migrants are such huge vectors of disease that we can't open up our ports of entry. And that's what Texas is trying to argue. That's what Louisiana is trying to argue. Even though those same states are the states who were against vaccines, against mask mandates, against all these public health measures that were necessary at the height of the pandemic.
So something that tell me if I'm wrong, but I am getting the sense that the situation is in fact chaotic. There are a lot of people. There's huge differences in just how similar cases are processed depending on the place, the time of the day. Some of that's kind of always been the case, but right now it's in the news. But the idea that my dad is getting is that the chaos of it is a result of some very generous policy that makes it super easy to come and get Obama phones or whatever And it almost feels like it's the opposite. It's the continued stubbornness to refuse to process people in a regular way. It's actually harsh policies that result in expulsions, like you're saying, and all these kinds of things that has lent itself to the chaos that we're seeing, right? So basically, they've got it backwards.
Yeah, absolutely. They have it backwards. I mean, this is the legacy of Trump and Stephen Miller policies that have not been sufficiently targeted by the Dems. And this is also, because people are fleeing very real and true cases. Venezuelans win their asylum cases at very high rates, as you all know. Nicaraguans, Cubans,
Matthew,
strong
Matthew doesn't know. I mean, he's still losing at quite a rapid rate. But for other people,
it's not for lack of continuous presence.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, anyways. I mean,
well, Taylor, let me ask you this, because now what's in the news, right, is the most recent is this flight that Desantis seems like loaded up people from San Antonio, had some like hustler out in the street and rounded people up from San Antonio, men, women, and children. Seems like a lot of Venezuelans, put them on some private jets and flew them to Martha's Vineyard.
Martha's?
Yeah, Martha's Vineyard. I actually contacted Susan Church from Boston if she wanted to come on to explain, but apparently she's quite busy in Martha Vineyard doing this. But this is what Greg Abbott has been doing, busing these immigrants to D.C. Do you have a sense, because my sense is the people I see in New Jersey and Philadelphia, they obviously all have family and they've moved on. Is there a huge segment of migrants that are coming in now that they don't have any family connections, any friends or anything in other parts of the country that they can go to? Are they really just kind of wandering around the streets of Texas, homeless, or what is going on? My sense, and I think Stephen's sense is that people generally have contacts that they go to. Is that not true, or has something radically changed at the border?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack about the crossings and about the buses and the plane. So the buses have been going on for months to primarily DC and New York, also to Chicago a little bit, from Texas, and then also from Arizona. The plane is a new, fun, exciting, let's trick people and get them on a plane and send them to an island and not notify anyone.
Massachusetts is so much better than Texas. So
yeah. I mean, there is that. Like, for all the immigration lawyers listening, you're going to have a way better chance winning your asylum case in front of northern judges. Boston's one of the highest grant rates in the country. So is New York. So is Arlington, DC. So they're pretty great places for people to end up, and folks are savvy about that. So it's two pieces. For one, just full stop, people should never be used as political pawns. These are human beings. They should not be talked about that they're being shipped. They're not cargo. They're human beings. They're being sent, etc.
But talk to us about what it means for the midterms. Just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, let's just keep using them as pawns. Second, they're not illegal aliens. And while I respect and understand some of the calls that have been put out, some of the tweets about DeSantis and Abbott are trafficking. They're not trafficking these people. These are people who have been apprehended by DHS. They have been processed. They have been fingerprinted. They have been background checked. And DHS, in their discretion, Border Patrol has made the decision to parole them for humanitarian reasons and allow them to seek asylum and continue their process in the United States. At that point, once they're released from DHS custody, they're free. They're free. They're not illegal aliens. They've been processed. They're in the system. They're in the computer system. They have upcoming court dates, upcoming ICE check-ins. Lots of them have what's called alternative to detention, so ADT, so either ankle monitors or SmartLink phones. These are not just random hordes of illegals running through the streets of Texas who have to get rounded up and shipped to New York. These are people who have turned themselves in. Entregar, me entregué. I turned myself in broad daylight usually. They weren't trying to sneak around, and they get released and they get to seek asylum in the United States. So at that point, we have seen there is huge amounts of infrastructure along the entire border, Texas, Arizona, California. faith-based organizations, Catholics, Christians, Jews, Muslims, non-religious organizations providing welcoming and shelter to these organizations, right? That's what I did for 10 years in El Paso, was working for the main migrant shelter, Annunciation House. And historically speaking, the whole time that I was at Annunciation House, I would say 99% of the people who arrived had a place to go, had a clear intended destination. It was extremely rare for us to find people who had nowhere to go. It would happen every once in a while, but almost everyone would leave and go to their families in the rest of the country. Some would go to Kentucky, some would go to Tennessee, some would go to Florida, Texas, other parts of Texas, whatever. The main folks we'd see who didn't have a place to go were usually going to be trans and GLBT youth who had families who were unwilling to accept them for who they were. And then we had to find alternate arrangements for them. Sometimes people fleeing extreme domestic violence situations where only their abuser's family was here in the United States, they couldn't go. And sometimes just other random one-off cases. But almost everyone would be gone within 24 to 48 hours. So there is truth to the fact that there has been a demographic shift slowly over the last year. Particularly for the Venezuelan population, there has been a shift of more and more Venezuelans coming who truthfully and earnestly say that they have nowhere to go. And a lot of them have been tricked by coyotes, tricked by smugglers, tricked by social media into believing that they're going to be able to get instant work permits, instant job placement, instant apartment support, etc. And so when they find out, when they get here, that no, there's temporary respite, there's temporary shelters, or you can go into a normal homeless shelter for the chronically unhoused population in our country, where we know we have a huge housing crisis already, and people don't feel necessarily comfortable in those shelters. A migrant shelter population is a different population than the services needed for the chronically homeless population. It becomes a bit of a disconnect. So it is accurate and true that there has been a demographic shift over the last year, but especially over the last 6 to 9 months, of more and more Venezuelans coming in particular who do not have anywhere to go, who do need a longer term placement when they're waiting months and months and months to be able to work lawfully. And so there's loads of people willing to step up, willing to volunteer, helping to find private homes for these folks, finding long-term shelters, etc. But instead, these same populations are being used as political pawns for here. You're telling me you have nowhere to go. I'm just going to write down Catholic Charities for New York City on your paperwork and let you go in Texas and say, good luck. And so then people go to New York thinking it's going to be a shelter, and it's a law office. Sorry, that was a really long rant.
But you have to admit that the libs are super owned, right?
No.
Like how hard are the libs owned? No, I mean, it does seem like with the Martha's Vineyard thing, the thing that strikes me about it, I mean, it is obviously meant to be like, oh, you think immigrants are so great? Well, watch this. Here's some immigrants. But the response has actually been pretty positive, at least from what I've seen. And actually, I think that if they had reached out beforehand to say, we've got 50 people, they have these skills, they've got these kids, we need resources, that probably, I've never been to Martha's Vineyard, but those people probably could have come together and said, yeah, we've got housing for them. You see what's going on with the Ukrainian placement program and how tens of thousands of Ukrainians have been able to find family or friends basically just raising their hands saying like, yeah, we can take them, we can help out. But it wasn't a coordinated relief effort. It was just literally a drop off. Like, I think they got off the plane and didn't have even like a car to take them to a place, right? Like they had to just
But the thing is,
walk.
The truth doesn't matter, right? Because all you see if you go on Twitter and social media and you look at Fox News, all they're saying is, see all these liberals, we're all crying about these immigrants coming. They're overwhelmed and, they don't want them. And it's like, it does get discouraging that, I won't say facts don't matter, but just reality doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. And we haven't seen the liberals be owned. We've seen people step up and provide welcome and support, just like we see at the border. Washington, D.C. has stepped up massively. Organizations in New York stepped up, organizations in Chicago when the buses started there. We've seen huge amounts of people stepping up, providing services, providing interpretation, and also providing social work type stuff of being like what we see in a lot of these cases, even though I'm saying there is a demographic shift of more folks than in the past, still a small percentage, but more people than in the past who say they have nowhere to go, is a lot of people are like, I did have somewhere to go. Border Patrol was just yelling at me a lot and said I couldn't find the paperwork close enough. Or they called my sponsor to verify the address, and my sponsor was at work, and so he didn't answer the phone. So they said, no, you're going here in New York now. So there's a lot of folks who have gotten on those buses under false pretenses. They've been tricked, right? They believe that they were sent to New York. We're seeing that particularly in the Arizona buses, even more than the Texas context. And all of the news reports that are coming out about Martha's Vineyard is that people were straight up lied to. People were told they were going to Boston. People were told they were going to be given expedited work permits, immediate job placements, etc. And that's just lies. That is just fundamentally not true. And there are so many people in this country who are willing to step up, provide services, exactly like you said about the Ukrainians. People are willing to open their homes. I get emails from them all the time. And there are lots of people who want to help.
But do you think there should be a more coordinated effort, though, maybe from like the governors of New York and New Jersey or wherever, to say, hey, if this is really a problem, let's coordinate. We can take people, we can relocate people for you from Texas or Florida or Arizona. I mean, that would presuppose good faith on, I guess, the sending states, so to speak, Governor Abbott, that he would, in good faith, work like that to solve this issue, which I don't think is probably as big of an issue. Certainly an issue that can certainly be solved, I think, rather easily. But so I guess I'm presupposing good faith on part of those people for that to have happened. But do you think, there might be a little bit of a criticism of governors from blue states who are maybe not willing to kind of like step up and take on some stuff? I don't know.
I think we're seeing people step up, but the issue was that it wasn't done in good faith. It was done as a gotcha. So, for example, this week in DC, there is extensive infrastructure, organizations, volunteers receiving the buses from Texas for literal months now. But then it's like, ooh, gotcha. Instead of dropping the people off in the place we always drop them off that has all the services, we're just going to not tell you and randomly drop them off in front of Vice President Harris's house to just torture these people, right? To just treat these people as political pawns instead of human beings who have been vetted, who have been security checked, who have been permitted into the country to seek asylum in the exact same way that was happening under Trump, that people could seek asylum. And
what if we picked up, I'm thinking homeless vets from New York City streets, sent them to Nebraska and South Carolina and all those red places that consistently vote against welfare and social support systems. Wouldn't that be a good own? Gotcha, Governor Abbott.
So owned. I
think it would be kind of crude, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think it
would be once again using human beings as pawns. But
so we're not going to do that. You said
okay, but talk about what it would mean for the midterms. So I do think I had a consultation this week with a lady, and I think this is a good illustration for people because I think people don't have any sense of like sort of how this works and what happens afterwards. But this woman had a good asylum claim. She didn't have an attorney. She's been checking with ICE locally since 2016. It's sort of like a probation thing, but I don't even think it's fair to call it probation because sometimes probation officers, this is my understanding, will see like how you're doing and, might actually check in on you. This is literally just, I'm here, sign a paper, and then usually get bad legal advice, right? Like I asked her, do you have a driver's license, which she's allowed to get in Washington? And she said, no, they told me that I can't have one. So she's been checking in with this federal agency for 6 years under the impression that they've just lied to her that you can't have a driver's license. She ends up going to her hearing in 2018, and she only brings an application in her daughter's name. She hasn't been provided any free legal advice. She doesn't have a work permit, so she can't work to hire a lawyer. And the judge yells at her and denies her application because she forgot to bring an application in English with her own name on it. She, after that, is able to hire a lawyer, luckily, not me, somebody else, who got the case remanded on appeal because the judge didn't give her like any warnings about, hey, bring an application in your name. He didn't set the table for denying the case in the first place. But the point is, like, after 6 years, no work permit, because of the way the work permit clock works, and we won't even get into that, like, she's not going to qualify for a work permit. She, got totally hosed by this judge. It's one thing to say sort of like, we don't have the infrastructure and all that. And it's true. But also we do have this massive infrastructure in place that is literally doing nothing. They could help with work permits. They could provide some base level assistance, or we could have, attorneys that are doing that because they're already checking in with people. But we do everything we can to just place obstacles in front of these people already, right? And so then the idea that we're bussing them around as some sort of stunt on top of all the bull that they have to deal with is it's so frustrating. But anyways, that's my little rant.
Absolutely. The states are spending millions of dollars on these buses. And I think the stats just came out for the flight to Martha's Vineyard. It was over $2,000 per migrant to, get the charter flights. And it's absolutely absurd. And we know that under Obama, there was a pilot program for intensive family case management, which was where, nonprofit organizations were contracted by the federal government to provide all of that support, the types of things that, you're right, the general public thinks of when they think of probation, support and understanding the legal process. And there was like 99% appearance rates for people's immigration courts when they had that support system in place. And Trump got rid of it and Biden hadn't restarted it. To his credit, one thing the admin has done that's good is they've vastly expanded funding for the immigration court help desk. And so there's immigration court help desks now in more cities than there used to be. There's more capacity. And so there is at least some bright points, of the type of information and legal advocacy that people are getting. The other thing I'll say that's kind of absurd about the buses and isn't always put out there is the statistic, if I remember correctly, I might be slightly off, that our colleagues in DC are reporting, is that when the bus arrives, only about 15% of those people have nowhere to go. The rest of the people were just like, you know what? There's a free bus that the government of Texas pays for me to get to DC. Why would I buy a Greyhound ticket or a plane ticket if I could just hop on the free bus? And so a lot of people are like, awesome, cool, there's this free bus I'm going to take to DC, and then I'm going to go to my family. My family's going to come and pick me up in DC. Or even if you're crossing somewhere like Eagle Pass Del Rio and you're trying to get to Miami, let's say, it's way cheaper to buy a plane ticket from DC to Miami than it is to buy a plane ticket from Eagle Pass to Miami. So it's a logical choice that a lot of people are like, awesome, thanks so much, Greg Abbott, you're giving us free buses to DC. It's only about 15% of the people showing up who are like, I need services, I have nowhere to go. And also, no one's in custody when they're on the buses. They're completely voluntary. So all of the buses arrive with 50 people leaving on them, and they arrive with way fewer numbers by the time they get there. Sometimes I know one of the New York buses had 11 people show up on it because they can get off whenever they want along the way. So they're air conditioned, they have Wi-Fi, they're faster than Greyhounds, they're way freaking nicer because they're charter buses. And they just get off along the way. They're like, oh, cool, yeah, I'm in Tennessee or whatever it is. I don't know the exact route. And they just get off along the way and have their family come pick them up. Free bus, thanks so much. And that's millions of dollars, millions that Texas has spent on this and Arizona.
We've been owned. They've owned us.
I think it's an own fail, a self-own. Yeah, I mean, so thinking again about my dad or people who are maybe more sympathetic to the overall cause, what's the elevator pitch for you want to call your congressman or you want to sort of understand how this can be fixed? What are the sort of top 2 or 3 things you would say we should be pushing for to get to where we need to go?
Open the ports of entry to
Abolish borders. Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
Well, yeah. Abolish the nation state. Abolish borders. A free movement of people.
Okay. And then after that,
after all that, more realistic solutions is create a free, fair, transparent, organized process by which migrants can access seeking asylum at the ports of entry safely, routinely, from all nationalities, so that people will not be pigeonholed into this vacuum of my only option is going to organized crime. And the reason why we saw those 46 migrants die in the back of that trailer in San Antonio is you can look all of their nationalities, or Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, and Mexico, because they were the 4 countries that you just cannot seek asylum almost no matter what you do. You're just going to keep getting dumped on the streets over and over again, no matter how much proof you have, no matter how much you beg, or you're going to get put on a plane back to El Salvador, back to Guatemala. And that's why we see drownings. That's why we see people dying in these trailer trucks. So open up the ports of entry, allow people to seek asylum without having to turn to organized crime, without having to turn to smugglers. If you actually care about people's safety, it is Title 42, it is metering, it is the closing of the ports of entry that has allowed the cartels to just expand. Title 42 was a stimulus plan for the cartels. We've said that over and over again. So that would be the biggest thing to change. I would say the second biggest thing to change that's actually realistic is the asylum clock, this idea that people, are going to be vetted and released from the government but cannot work legally, because we all know that the vast majority of the people just turn to unauthorized employment, which means they get exploited, which means they get trafficked, which means that they get in these horrific work environments where they're underpaid and taken advantage of and put into danger because they don't have this magical piece of paper that is even confusing for immigration lawyers to understand the asylum clock and the process and the categories. So those would be the 2 biggest changes that I think could actually maybe happen.
I think there has to be one bigger change before that, because you said we have to get people to care about people's safety. We actually have to get people to view these people as people. And that's the thing, is they don't view them as humans. People laughing about DeSantis's trick with Martha Vineyard and all that because they don't view them as people. They don't view them as humans, because if they viewed them as humans, they would be like, hey, that's a good own, but wait a minute. Aren't those human beings? Like, I get it might be like a cute little joke to think about, what if we did this? But any good person, right, would say, yeah, but they're human beings. So these are bad people. Like, Ron DeSantis is a bad person. People who think this is funny or fun, they're bad people because they don't value them as human beings. Maybe they see them as human beings, I don't know, but they don't value them as human beings. So if you don't value someone as a human being, you're not going to care about their safety. You're saying, they're being shipped, right? They're not being shipped, right? Illegals. All this terminology is used to dehumanize them. And I think that's the biggest change, because if you get people to recognize they're actually human beings, right, then maybe we could have a conversation. And there was a news article from probably Fox or someone, and I think it was like Numbers USA kind of highlighted this thing. Oh, it was the New York Times, of course. And it was an interview where the guy said, I'm just here to help support my family back home. And they're like, yeah, look, they're not seeking asylum, not understanding these human complexities of you can be fleeing persecution and also have a desire to help your family. Like that. People in Venezuela who are being targeted by the government can't work. They can't work. Their business has been taken away, so they can't provide for their family. So let's go to the United States. I can work. I can provide for my family. But it's just not viewing them as human, or not viewing them as humans that are full humans that really deserve respect. I don't even care. You don't have to love them or anything. Just respect them as humans. And that is at the core, I think, of what is really the issue with people like Stephen Miller and maybe even Joe Biden, to be honest about it. So I wish we can get to people caring about people's safety, but I think we have to have them view them as people first. So
I think
that's my rant.
That's a huge part of it. There's a small number of people, it's probably the minority, but who are under the impression that there's like a paper store that we've talked about this before, where if you're one of the good ones, you can go and just get your papers at the paper store. And therefore, any kind of irregular immigration, like, wading across the river or whatever, like that is seen as a serious breach of norms because there's this other thing that you could do that's legal and correct. And that's obviously all completely false. I don't know how many of those people you can convince to see immigrants as people if you disavow them of that misunderstanding, but at least maybe a couple. But you're right. I mean, that's a huge part of it. But we've taken a lot of your time. Now you can help lawyers who need advice on what's going on at the border.
Yeah, I'll do my pitch if you'll let me do my pitch. Yeah.
Pitch it.
So
Wait, Stephen, can you get out your pen and pad?
Oh, believe me, I've got her Venmo locked and loaded.
Thanks.
I know exactly how to get a hold of Taylor. So
yeah, I mean, I don't know what your listenership is exactly like, but I'll do my pitch, and that's that I was with nonprofits for 10 years. I love nonprofits, but I decided to leave nonprofit work specifically so I could be an emergency rapid response to all the that was getting thrown at us by Trump and now by the Biden administration. I keep saying I want out of this work, but it's just every day there's a new emergency. And so instead of working for a nonprofit again, so that I could continue to be able to be flexible and nimble and kind of the speedboat emergency response to border issues, to asylum issues, to busing, to flights, to all of these things, I've stayed independent. I can speak about politics. I don't have to worry about 501c3 regulations. I can just be there as an expert. So a lot of what I do is I mentor nonprofit attorneys all for free. I started charging private attorneys for mentoring on asylum cases, for answering questions. Still answer a lot of questions for free. All active kidnapping cases, you get the free discount if somebody's actively kidnapped, no matter what you're charging. But the way I'm able to do this is from private donations.
What if Stephen does a kidnapping? What if it's
if Stephen does a kidnapping? I don't know if it'll be free.
If I've got the immigrant in my office and I've locked the door from outside, is it technically a kidnapping? And do I get free advice?
So I do unaccompanied minors free. I do active kidnapping. If they're no longer actively kidnapped, if they're now safe, I might ask to charge for the private bar if they can afford it. But most of my mentoring is to the nonprofit bar. I don't make them pay, so that I ask that if you are a private lawyer, and even if you don't need my mentoring services, send me $5 on Venmo. This is literally how I exist and pay my bills. And Northern California is much more expensive than South Texas, and I am learning the hard way. So, buy me a beer, buy me a cup of coffee, send me $5. Super appreciated.
What is your Venmo?
My Venmo is Taylor K. Levy, Levy. So at TAYLORKLEVY. That's my Venmo. That's my Cash App. Yeah, all those things.
So this is going to be really sad because we're going to encourage our listeners to, send you a couple of dollars. And then you're not going to get any because we don't have any listeners. So it's going to really put a fine point on the fact that no one listens to this. But no, and if you're a lawyer dealing with a lot of asylum seekers, but the border is still sort of this faraway land of strangeness, Taylor's been amazing. I've been able to reach out to her. And if you're able to, especially if you are engaging with her and asking for advice, don't be an asshole, like send some money, because she's really bad at asking for it. So just
I am
do
really
the right
bad
thing,
at asking
right?
for it. So thank you, Stephen. I am very bad at that.
Yeah, she's bad. And so don't take advantage.
You could also send me money, right?
No.
And then, you could.
Don't be weird about this.
You
Why?
could. I'm not going to give it to anyone else, but
You're just going to spend it.
Yeah, it'll be here in my heart.
All right. Well, those are your two options then, Matthew or Taylor. I'll leave it up to the discretion of the listener. Thanks again for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Send this episode to your racist uncle, right?
Do you have a racist uncle?
Of course. I'm a white guy.
I think we all maybe have one racist uncle. My dad's a Trumpster. He has me as a daughter, and my dad is hardcore Trumpster.